My name is Terry Johnson. The branch was the Air Force. I was an Airman First Class, E4.
What year did you join?
1960.
What year did you get out?
64.
What inspired you to join?
I was guilty of sin of being a juvenile jerk in high school, and 8 days before my junior year was done, I got a disciplinary expulsion from school. Couldn't go back, couldn't re-enroll. So I'm going to teach them a lesson. And I joined the military to leave town and get away from everybody. And about 3 weeks later, I realized I'd made a very serious mistake. And as soon as I got to a permanent base, I attempted to re-enroll in high school. And they were going to back me up a grade. I was in California, and they were going to make me a sophomore, and I said, I'm not going to do that. So I went down the street to junior college, lied to them about a high school diploma in the days before fax machines and cell phones, and got to do one semester there. They asked me again about the diploma, and I said, darn, I just plain forgot it and changed schools. Took my grades with me, and nobody ever asked again until I had 2 associates and a bachelor's from the University of Nevada. And I tried to enroll in New Mexico State University, and they wouldn't let me. I had to go take the GED. I was proud of the fact I had 3 degrees, no high school diploma.
What year did you get your GED?
2004.
2000. Oh, wow.
So I had a pretty good scam going, so I just kept it going. I saw no reason to change it. It worked.
So what made you choose the Air Force?
I had gone to the Army, and I wanted to, at that time, the Army would guarantee you your first base or the airborne division you wanted. And I went in, I wanted the 101st Airborne. But I was not a high school graduate, and I was only 17, and they wouldn't guarantee me anything. So I left them, and I went over and talked to the Navy recruiter, and the only thing he knew how to say was go back to school. Well, that wasn't an option for me in the state of Idaho. So I went to the Air Force recruiter, and he says, you ever been in trouble with the law? And I said, I'm told that you're supposed to call Ernie Barlow, who was the local juvenile authority. And so he called Ernie, and Ernie said, I never heard of him. So that way I didn't lie, Ernie did. And they took me, and I went, and I sobered up in the Air Force. So
Ernie did he know what he was doing at that time?
Yes, he did. He knew exactly what he was doing. He did that quite often. That's why when he heard that I was talking to recruiters, he called me. I had just recently gotten off probation. It wouldn't have been a crime if I'd been an adult, but it was as a juvenile. So I got 6 months probation, and I'd just gotten off probation. And he told me, when he found out I was going to recruiters, he called me and he says, don't answer the question about being in trouble with the law. He says, just tell them to call me. And I said, okay. So that's what I told him, and that's what he told them.
So he'd had experience with the situation.
Yeah, the recruiters knew what was happening when I told them to call him, because they had experience in this too. But he said, yeah, I never heard of him. So they took me, and I found myself in Texas marching around in the August heat.
Do you think that he did you a favor?
Oh, yes. And on my 21st birthday, I don't know how he timed this perfectly because I was in Vietnam on my 21st birthday, but I got a manila envelope package with my entire record in it. There's not a piece of paper in Idaho that says I wasn't ever in trouble.
And you think that he's the one that
that his name was on the return address.
Nice. That's great.
Yep.
Did he know your family and stuff?
Nope.
Just through school?
Yeah, I was just a kid that had gotten in trouble and was trying hard to get out of trouble and stay out, and he helped.
That's great.
Yeah,
really
they did that a lot in that particular state. There were I knew some kids that were in really bad trouble that joined the military. There was one guy who got thrown out of school before I did, and he was looking at probably an adult conviction on a couple of felonies. And Ernie got him in the military, and the next time I saw him was about almost 20 years later, and he was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Special Forces. Ernie saved a lot of people. Well, Ernie and the other Idaho probation officers saved a lot of people with that program.
Wow.
And I was one of them.
Wow. Where did you go to boot camp?
Lackland Air Force Base, Texas.
And
It was at San Antonio
coming from Idaho to Texas.
in August.
I bet that was fun.
Oh, yeah.
Had you ever traveled before, been outside of the state?
I had been outside the state a little bit. I made one trip on my own on a motorcycle to California. I got in trouble for that one too. But my parents knew I was doing it, but I still got in trouble for it. But I've been around the Pacific Northwest. I've been into Canada. I've been almost to the panhandle of Alaska up in Canada. And so, yeah, I had traveled around. I was familiar with Montana, Washington, Oregon,
But
Idaho,
that's nothing
Nevada.
like Texas, is it?
Nothing like Texas. And where we actually lived, the house was in Nevada and our mailbox was in Idaho. The road between us was the state line. But we were Idaho residents because most of the land was in Idaho.
Interesting. So were you on like a farm or ranch?
It
or
was a cattle ranch. Yeah.
cattle ranch?
Yeah, I grew up a cowboy.
Cool. And then where were you stationed?
My original, I went to Chanute Air Force Base to become an aircraft mechanic. And my original permanent base was Castle Air Force Base, California, near Merced. And then, I don't know why, but there was about 6 or 8 of them were transferred down to George Air Force Base, California. Now, Castle was a bomber base and George was a fighter base. So we went from bombers down to fighters. And I ended up down in Victorville, California as the primary base. I was there for not quite 2 years. And I was a crew chief on the F-104. We were the last F-104 unit in the Air Force. That was the first airplane that would do twice the speed of sound straight up. It was quite a machine. But I was in charge of the maintenance on one airplane. And I had a pilot. In the Air Force in those days, the airplane was assigned to the crew chief, and then the pilot was assigned to the airplane. So he even referred to it as my airplane. And technically it was. But I had a Captain Gray who was my pilot, and we shared, both of us had come out of small towns in Nevada and right on the Idaho border, and we were both LDS, and we were both, both Air Force, obviously. He wasn't the renegade I was. He was a captain in the United States Air Force, an Air Force Academy graduate, and he was married and had a little baby daughter. But we were really good friends. The Vietnam War started cranking up, and this is before the newspapers had hold of it. This was in 1962 and 63. We were in Vietnam. The U.S. Air Force was there first. The Marines were right on their heels, but the Air Force was in there first. And our primary job was instructing and advising the indigenous Air Force. And we had pilots in combat, but it never made the newspapers. And this is long before the Gulf of Tonkin thing, which really cranked things up there. But I got to looking at how the Air Force works in war. And in war, the enlisted men send the officers off to fight. Well, I'm not wired like that. If there was going to be a fight, I wanted to be in it. So I started looking for a job that I would qualify for, that maybe I could get trained in, that would get me actually in the combat zones. I found one, it was downed air crew rescue. So I applied for that and got hired. And the first thing I did was go to Army Jump School at Fort Benning, Georgia. And then I went to a gunner's school because we sometimes found ourselves holding twin 50s in the helicopters. And then we trained constantly. And what we would do is when an air crew went down, we would send in the combat zone. We weren't there yet, but we would send 3 helicopters and 3 cover aircraft and go out and find the pilot or the crew, depending on how big an airplane it was. And if they were capable of getting a hook on themselves on their own harness, we'd just lower the hook and pull them back up. If they weren't capable, then we'd go down and get them and get them back up, put them in a stretcher if necessary, whatever. And right at that time, we'd have to send them up and then wait for the hook to come back for us. And so we trained. I was based at Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. We were never there. We were up at Bicycle Lake Army Air Station up in the desert north of Barstow. Nobody ever went there accidentally. You have to know where the place is and how to get there to even get to it. It's really remote. But we spent most of our time out there working with the Army helicopters and the Army guys, because they were more into ground combat training than we were. And so we'd go in and rescue one or two of them, and while the other guys are trying to beat us up and get us stopped, we made it as realistically as we thought we could, until we actually tried it and found out it wasn't realistic at all. But that was our game. So I got sent to Vietnam, and I walked off the ramp of the C-130 in Saigon, and we were lined up in formation. A Jeep rolled up. An Army colonel got out of it. And of course, we were called to attention when the colonel showed up. And he said, "Gentlemen, the president is dead." It was November 22nd. And the guy back over here, over my shoulder, said, "Oh, my loving God, Lyndon Johnson is president, and we are dead." We got moved up to Da Nang. And from Da Nang, we weren't doing an awful lot, but we went out northwest of Da Nang. There's a pretty good sized area out in the mountains, the highlands, that are occupied by a group of people called Montagnards. So we went out there and set up a small base, and we referred to it as being in the yard. And it was right up near the DMZ, demilitarized zone that divided North and South Vietnam. So we would spend 30 days on the yard and then 60 days back at Da Nang, and then another 30 days in the yard. And when we're in the yard, most of our rescues and recoveries would be in North Vietnam. So we'd actually cross the border and go in there and get our guys out. And I spent 60 days in the yard in 2 different tours, and then got hurt and had to come home. But on my second time out there, the second time in the yard, the first time we made 84 trips up north, 84 missions. We actually made 42 recoveries, or rescues. There's a difference in rescue and a recovery. We actually made 42 rescues and 5 recoveries out of those trips. And then during the second time up, about the first time, we got a call. We went running up there, and we had an airplane down, and couldn't find the pilot. And we looked and looked and looked and ran out of fuel and went back. And we went back up that afternoon and looked again, and went back, and we went back up the next morning and looked again and went back. And that time when we got back, I got word that the local site boss, the commander, wanted to see me. And that's weird. He should be talking to the pilots, not me. But anyway, I went in to see him. And the reason he called me in there is because somebody had looked at the records and found out that I was captain's crew chief. And it was him we were looking for. But we had confirmation that he was on his way to the Hanoi Hilton. He had been captured. He was alive. So that was some help. We were supposed to go back home the next morning. We're back down to Da Nang the next morning. We got hit, and got hit hard by ground troops. And they just took us apart, and I was wounded. And so I ended up in the hospital in Da Nang, and then over in the Philippines, and then came home. Years later, I was flying air tankers, firefighting, and I was in Reno. So just for the heck of it, I looked in the phone book, and there was children's in the phone book. And then, I don't know, another 5-6 years. It was over 20 years. It was almost 30 years. It was about 92 or 93. I was in Reno, and I opened the phone book, and there was a great colonel, retired. So I called him, and went over there for supper that night. And he told me the story that he had ejected from the airplane, and as soon as he hit the ground, he was captured by about 400 farmers with pitchforks. And nobody poked him. He was never hurt. He wasn't injured. He was treated the way a prisoner of war should be treated. But the way we used to find him is they had a little thing on their collar called a beeper, and they immediately took that off and smashed it. That's why we couldn't find him. But he had gone to the Hanoi Hilton and had stayed there until he was in the first group that came home. And he stayed in the Air Force. So I was delighted to see him and his wife and his daughter. The time that was probably the most important was the time that I was in Vietnam. I felt like I was really doing a job that needed done, and I was in the thick of it like I need to be. And I couldn't have sat back at base and watched those guys go off to war and come home and not come home. I'm not wired like that. I've got to be in the fight. I don't know the statistics on it, but most of the people in my unit who was doing what I was doing had been in trouble as kids. They didn't come out of Sunday school classes. And it's the same thing in the Special Forces and the Navy SEALs and the Force Recon Marines. They are not the guys that you want your daughter dating. Not until after they get in the military and get calmed down a little bit. We were the mean boys.
You were just preparing for that.
Yeah, we just didn't know it, but that's exactly what we were doing. If you're going to let fear control any part of you, you can't do it. You just plain can't. And when you're on the ground, especially after you've sent him up in the stretcher, and you're on the ground with a gun in your hand looking around, knowing that there's probably realistically 100 people within a mile of you that want to kill you, it keeps you on your toes. The fight itself was personal, but the overall objective was really obscure. Yeah. I got out when my 4 years was up. I cross-trained again into Air Research Development Command. I was airborne qualified, parachute qualified, so it was an easy step. And we were doing things, we were trying to invent the wheel for the space program. We were doing things like sensory deprivation, how long you can go without any senses, and muscle memory, how long it takes to actually learn to do something really weird, and all kinds of weird things. Ejection seat tests. I rode ejection seats out of the back seat of B-58s, and 2 of them were supersonic. And that's sort of like stepping out and kissing a 60-mile-an-hour freight train. It just really slams you. But when my 4 years was up, I left.
When did you become a pilot?
Well, I was in the Air Force. They had flying clubs. And when I was 5 years old, we went to an aunt and uncle's house, and they lived out in the country just west of Twin Falls, Idaho. And I saw this thing with 2 wings on it dive into a field and go scooting back and forth with white stuff coming out of it. So I stole my cousin's bicycle and I went down there and watched it real close, got covered in the dust. It had to either be DDT or sulfur because it didn't hurt me. But I just got covered in the dust. And I went back and told my mom, I'm going to do that. Well, she's stripping me off to throw me in the bathtub. And I did. I grew up to be a crop duster pilot and an air tanker pilot. But that's all I ever wanted to do. And the minute I got to where there was military flying clubs, I joined and started flying. I became friends with, there was 6 of us all together, and 4 of us bought 5 airplanes that we leased out. And then another guy and I bought a pre-World War II trainer, 2-place open cockpit, fun airplane. And I learned to fly it. And sold it, bought it for $700 and sold it for $5,000. Today it's worth $250,000. I should have kept that one a little while, but that's all I ever wanted to do. So I flew and flew and flew, and when I got out, I had a commercial license, and that's all. I didn't have an instrument rating or instructor or anything else. But then I found out that there was a GI Bill, And once you're a private pilot, that would pay 90% of your flight training. So I got my multi-engine rating, I got my instructor ratings, instrument instructor, I got the instrument rating, I got my helicopter rating. And my mother was a good friend of a woman named Ione Reeder, and her husband was Charlie Reeder. And the biggest ag operation, biggest aviation operation in the area was Reeder Flying Service. So I had an inside track into the front door. And I got hired there. I worked as an instructor for 1 year, and they broke me in spraying. I flew crop dusters for 15 years and moved over to the air tankers firefighting, and did that for 28 years.
Where were you when you were crop dusting? What part of the country?
South Idaho, North Idaho, and California. I worked the California coast for about 2.5 years. I was under the impression that all the big boys went to either California or Arizona, and I couldn't get a job in Arizona, couldn't find anybody down here. So I went to California and flew out there. And for 2.5 years, all I did was spray artichokes. But so if anybody you know ate an artichoke between 71 and 75, I probably sprayed it. Because all the artichokes in the world are growing right there in Monterey Bay.
Did you love every minute of it?
Every minute. Every minute. And the same thing in the tankers. I loved flying the tankers. There was some of the old stuff came back flying tankers because every year except one, we lost at least one crew in the industry. And the industry wasn't that big. There were 44 heavy air tankers when I started. There were 10 when I left. So, we knew all of them. Every pilot knew every pilot.
So did you ever do anything else professionally that didn't have anything to do with flying?
Not on any kind of a permanent basis. When I graduated from the University of Nevada, I was hired by North American Aviation. And my degree's in physics, and I was hired by North American Aviation Rocketdyne Division. And about 3 months later, I moved across the hall and down that way 2 doors and was a NASA employee. And I thought maybe I'd found a back door into the astronaut program, and then figured out I hadn't. So somebody was going to find out I didn't have a high school diploma. So at that time, the head of the department was a young man named Ron Mullins. And at age 24, he had 2 PhDs in physics. But anyway, I walked into his office one day, and I said, Ronnie, I'm going to go home and be a crop duster pilot. I'm tired of this. And to put that in perspective in time, Apollo 11 had lifted off, but hadn't arrived at the moon yet. So I resigned from NASA the same day that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon.
Did you want to be
I wanted to go to the moon.
You wanted to go to the moon?
I did want to go to the moon. I would still go if they offered me a trip to the moon, I would take it. I don't want to just do Earth orbit. I've been high. I've been in the backseat of an F-104, and we've gone up about 75,000 feet. And you can start to see the curvature of the Earth up there. I'm still flying several days a week. I probably fly 60, 70 hours a month, given instruction. I own 2 airplanes, and I do flight instruction. I have said often that I don't want to live forever. I just want to live till I'm tired of flying.
Your rebelliousness really set you up for life, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Yeah, it really did. I was fortunate. There's a lot of kids that were the same kind of rebellious as I am and are getting paroled about now. And I was probably on that track if it hadn't been for Ernest Marlowe.
Wow.
And his approach to juvenile justice.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Would you have changed anything?
No.